Tiny Tina's Assault on Dragon Keep was originally a DLC for Borderlands 2, and has been repackaged as a standalone game subtitled A Wonderlands One-Shot Adventure, in order to market the upcoming spin-off game Tiny Tina's Wonderlands. This repackaged game is not compatible with the original Borderlands 2 game, and has been slightly reworked to function as a separate game. The DLC was meant to be played after completing the main story for Borderlands 2, and as such, it is riddled with spoilers for the end of that game. We have tried to avoid any spoilers for our review, but it is very possible that some will exist in the text and images on the screen. If you haven't played Borderlands 2, but plan to in the future, we suggest avoiding this standalone package in favor of playing the original game with the DLC. Clear out dungeons and kill dragons with bullets in Tiny Tina's Assault on Dragon Keep, a Wonderlands One-Shot Adventure. Is triggering a mimic still terrifying with a teammate?
Borderlands has always had a great and very noticeable art style, blending 3D graphics with a hand-drawn appearance. In the light, Tiny Tina's Assault on Dragon Keep looks exactly how you would expect, but much of the game is actually quite dark, where details are lost and there's often not enough contrast between the enemies and the environment. Much of the spectacle is lost in the chaos of battles as well, where useless loot litters the battlefield and too frequent status effects take over most of the screen. In quiet moments, it's easy to see the charm, but quiet moments are few and far between. Tiny Tina's Assault on Dragon Keep is a first-person shooter with RPG mechanics. As a reward for defeating enemies, exploring, and completing quests, you'll gain experience and level up, adding points to an extensive upgrade system that improves or opens up different abilities based on the class you choose at the beginning and the skill trees you decide to invest in. Before you start a playthrough, you have 6 characters to choose from, all with different abilities, like the Siren's ability to freeze enemies in a bubble and steal their health, or the Assassin's ability to turn invisible for a short period of time and distract enemies.
One of the big selling points for the Borderlands series is the large amount and variety of loot in the form of guns. Chests, missions, and defeated enemies often provide new guns with a variety of quirks that you will want to compare with your current collection of guns to determine if your loadout can get any better. This is one of the several features that contributes to the information overload that complicates gameplay. Although the bulk of the game is running in circles around bullet sponge enemies until everything in the room is dead, a decent chunk of the game is navigating menus to compare the details of the guns, shields, and grenade mods in your hands with the items that litter the battlefield. The variety is impressive, but often overwhelming, and made worse by the fact that most of the time everything that dropped was weaker than what we were already holding. It was exhausting to sift through every pile of loot to find only an occasional diamond in the rough. For a DLC, there's a decent amount of content. The different regions you discover are very large, so much so that the fast travel stations eventually become a necessity for finishing side quests. They're full of chests to open and enemies that respawn for the sake of leveling up your character. Multiple side quests have you moving back and forth across and between the region. Unfortunately, they're mostly fetch quests, with the occasionally clever writing, but rarely any clever design. Exploration is a bit hampered by the hard-to-read minimap and the game's use of vertical space. The map gives you very little information about verticality, so although it was fun to occasionally work out how to climb up to an objective in a tree, it was also sometimes difficult to see where you were supposed to go, especially when the fog of war remained on the map because we hadn't explored an area directly above where we were. You're also only allowed to set one objective at a time, so if different missions have objectives near each other, the player needs to periodically go into the menu and switch missions to avoid backtracking later.
It also feels very apparent at times that this was not designed as a standalone game, and we're not sure it was balanced properly when it was converted. The original was the final DLC for Borderlands 2, and as such, it was expected that players would be relatively experienced and at a high level, with a lot of the skills already unlocked. There's no proper tutorial in this version of Assault on Dragon Keep, and the initial difficulty feels pretty high. Ammo and weapons are scarce in the beginning, and the hunt for ammo doesn't ever really end. The leap of faith into the fast-paced gameplay and abundant menus is not beginner-friendly at all. It takes a few hours before you get a sense of how your character plays, and even more time to get used to and recognize the different types of weapons, and be able to experiment with your loadouts and skills. Even in very early areas, enemies seem to spawn at an alarming rate, and the large amount of enemies and variety of enemy types actually felt like it limited how we could play. If we kept ourselves at a distance, many enemies could jump or teleport across the map to attack us, and if we ran up to them, a lot of the enemies spammed attacks that would push us away from them, so most battles boiled down to running in a circle and shooting from the hip. All that being said, once you get the hang of the mechanics and expand your character's abilities, Assault on Dragon Keep is a good time. It's very satisfying to get the visual feedback of reducing an enemy's health quickly with a burst of submachine gun fire, or seeing the words "critical" bounce onto the screen when you get a distant headshot. The second wind mechanic that gives you the opportunity to revive yourself if you get a kill is equal parts exciting and stressful as you frantically search for something to fight. The game is full of opportunities for you to feel like a badass.
I've heard many people over the years say that Borderlands feels best with a group of 4 in online multiplayer, and that's probably true, but I feel it's a rare treat to have a game of this genre and scale work as well as it does in local multiplayer. Assault on Dragon Keep is fully playable in 2-player local co-op, with each player controlling their own character, gaining experience independently in fights, and collectively when completing missions. Players share an objective, and either player can complete and turn in a given mission to reward both players. You're able to switch between vertical and horizontal split screen. Horizontal split screen makes items difficult to identify and menus difficult to read, so we much prefer the vertical layout.
Players are able to explore a given region independently, but there's not much reason to do so, as only one objective is marked at a time, and fights are much easier when both players work together. Traveling between regions will teleport both players to the same spot at the destination. Currency is shared between players, but all other loot, like ammo, guns, grenade mods, and shields, are on a first-come, first-served basis. This forced us to be mindful whenever we opened chests or collected loot, and we were often pointing out areas to each other so both of us had the opportunity to look at the options available. Luckily, chests always seemed to be separated into convenient groupings that made it simple for us to divvy them up. Despite the reduced screen real estate for each player, playing with a friend in local co-op is a better time than single player. The different skills encourage teamwork and experimentation to find ways that they work together best, and increase variety in the gameplay for both players. Players can revive each other if either is downed in a fight, although this can be difficult in more intense fights. As fights continue normally as long as at least one of the players is alive, it's possible for one player to pick up the slack if the other is having a hard time, especially if they choose a character class that emphasizes teamwork. Some classes are more helpful than others for co-op. For instance, the Siren can be a great support class with skills that allow them to heal teammates, but the Assassin plays more like a lone wolf, with skills that are less directly helpful to the team.
We discovered the hard way that checkpoints for progress within an area are actually rare, so exiting and returning to the game later put us back quite far and forced us to do some lengthy fights all over again. Experience seems to save often, but returning to a game always started us at a travel station, ignoring any progress we had made in a region toward an objective. Some objectives required an hour or more of traveling and fighting before we got to a point where our progress was saved, so the game is not good for short sessions. The game has quite an awkward continuation system for local co-op. All character progress is saved, but from the menu only player 1's character is initially visible. After connecting the second controller, player 2 needs to go into a separate menu to select their character before starting the game. The game doesn't even prompt them to do so. The option is actually buried amongst other options at the bottom of the screen. Player 2 is also not able to control anything on the pause menu, even if they were the one to pause. It's a bit frustrating that a game that otherwise offers the full experience to both players would strip away player 2's agency in this one area.
The premise of Tiny Tina's Assault on Dragon Keep is a lot of fun. Characters present in both Borderlands games play a Dungeons & Dragons-like role-playing game, and the gameplay happens in this game within a game. The story really bleeds into the gameplay, where side quests and some challenges are humorous representations of the decisions faced by characters in their tabletop game. We loved the escapist fantasy setting, and we appreciated the funny commentary from the characters about the events we were participating in. The story is great and surprisingly emotional, but it's very much an epilogue, with extensive spoilers and heavy reliance on referencing characters and events from the main game. Sure, it's not difficult to piece together what happened before, but the weight of the story is lost without some investment in the previous game. As such, despite how good the story is, it doesn't work on its own. We wouldn't recommend this game for people interested in the story who haven't completed Borderlands 2.
We had one or two moments where an event did not trigger correctly, temporarily blocking our progress on a side mission, to the point that we resorted to looking up a walkthrough to make sure we hadn't missed something. It finally triggered when we returned to the game the next day, but we didn't notice any other technical issues, which was actually impressive considering how intense and busy the action gets at times. Tiny Tina's Assault on Dragon Keep, a Wonderlands One-Shot Adventure, is fun to play, and is a great epilogue to Borderlands 2, but it's an odd choice for a standalone product. It's not particularly expensive, and there's a decent amount of content for the price, but it doesn't feel like a complete game. The audience for this game seems very narrow, limited to either fans of the original release who want to replay the DLC without having to play through Borderlands 2 again, or people who are only interested in the upcoming Tiny Tina's Wonderlands and want to play this as a demo. It certainly feels like a demo, which makes it weird that they're charging for this game at all. Ultimately, I believe this release is anti-consumer, and feels like an attempt to get more money from the existing fans by selling them something they already have, or even trick less discerning players into buying only a piece of a game, all as a means of marketing for a new game. From a gameplay perspective, Assault on Dragon Keep is a lot of fun in co-op, and might be worth your time if you and a friend fall into one of the few categories that this standalone game is for. But for anyone new to the Borderlands franchise, or anyone looking for a full, self-contained experience, this is one we would not recommend.